but this should get you down the road of how do you mitigate these risks with that. So, in conclusion, we have been tasked to answer 3 questions. First, who do you source CR13 from? We recommend that Holder become your primary CR13 vendor due to its technology. However, in the short term, Bream should be your initial vendor because they can meet the demand more effectively. Second, how much do you buy and when do you buy? We provided how much you buy. We recommend that you buy this in July to take advantage of the sales discounts that you can get and the guaranteed delivery. We don't want Warmco to leave money on the table because we are predicting that home builders are going to try, and even replacement air conditioners are going to experience a surge in demand similar to the way the engine companies experienced a surge in demand when their emission standards changed. Third, we feel that do you centralize or decentralize? We feel that overall a centralized distribution strategy is more effective. In the short term, we want to see this go to the virtual warehouse so that regions within each other, next to each other, et cetera, can see where is the inventory so you can start to minimize order costs. Long term, we want you to look at a physical centralized distribution strategy so you can determine overall, is this more effective in meeting the overall service requirements of our vendors and sustaining our costs in the long term. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and open it up to questions.
Question regarding how are you going to implement this from a financial standpoint? Did you look into how you're going to fund this, purchasing these extra units, the extra virtual warehousing, and so on and so forth?
The extra, is that too loud? No, okay. The extra units will only be an additional to how we were growing before. So we're not having any extra units on top of that we will be purchasing. The CR10s will be replaced by CR13s, so there is not another more inventory place issue. And the second question was, would you mind repeating?
Regarding the financing of it.
Well, first, we'll only have the virtual warehouse, which we believe that with the decrease in the safety stock levels, we will be able to offset those costs and with the increase in the cost of developing the warehouse, the virtual warehouse. In terms of the long-term solution, we have developed a model which will minimize the costs, and once we have determined the inventory levels in the 16 distribution centers, we will be able to give you a full cost estimate.
You seem to have placed a lot of your analysis around the analogy of what happened with the engine markets with the big 18-wheelers. Are you sure that that's an apt analogy? I mean, what's the difference between what happened with those big engines and what's happening here with your air conditioners?
Yes, we do believe that is the case. And if you could please go to slide number 16, Eric. What we think, well, CR10 is definitely cheaper than CR13. And based on the data that we have, the counties, 70% of them will allow the CR10 to be placed in the new homes and in the replacement market. So based on that data, we know that there will be demand. And we looked at the model that we have that has been provided to us by our great regional managers. So we have the data for how much we will need according to that, and that data builds in the probability of how many counties will actually allow us to place the CR10s. So all that demand data we gathered is based on all those probability models. Does that answer your question?
Kind of.
Okay.
Maybe a different way to ask it would be, what's the, you're putting CR13s in place of the CR10s, right? That's the requirement from the regulation?
No, there is a loophole in the regulation that states that if the county decides that we can put in CR10s that were produced before January 23rd, 2006, if they decide that we can place them there, then our vendors or our dealers are going to decide to do that. They'll be more apt to do that because those items are cheaper. That's why we think that we need to keep a stock of the CR10s since 70% of our customers will still be using those for some time.
Is it for those customers, given the new expense of a CR13, you talked a lot about replacement in your model. Did you consider at all that customers would do a lot more repairing of the SEER 10s rather than putting a new SEER 13 in?
The data that was given to us was also based on what the customer wants. And actually, there is another cost issue that comes into it, and that is the R22 refrigerant that is put in there. So most customers will want to go to the SEER 13 because the R22, the production will stop in 2010, and they'll be banned out. So the cost is expected to go from $80 per replacement of the refrigerant to about $800. So we believe that all that data and all those probabilities have been built in the model to forecast the demand for the SEER 13s. However, we still do believe that they will be using the SEER 10s since they're cheaper and not a lot of people, the end customers usually listen to the dealers, the homeowner builders. Sorry. Yes.
Do you have a strategy to, you talk a lot about regulation and what's going on with that. Do you have a strategy to somehow try to influence regulatory requirements?
Well, our strategy is to be the company that stresses sustainability, and that's why we're going with the holders products for the long term. So our strategy is to let our dealers know that this is the better product. This will not use R22, which causes the ozone effect, et cetera. So I think that as a company, we want to stress that we're going towards sustainability on top of regulations that are forced upon us by the government. That is our strategy, to provide the product long-term that is going to be the better product that is the same price, actually, as the Bream's product, but gives the better results.
With change being inevitable and wanting a sustainable supply chain, how did you assess your risk of going with a short-term supplier and then a single-source long-term supplier? How is going with one supplier a sustainable process, and did you have any planning about working with your short-term supplier to keep them in the mix somehow, whether reinvesting with them in terms of keeping them involved in the business as a supplier somehow, helping them upgrade or helping them with, process or something like that? I mean, how do you go with one supplier and still be sustainable?
Actually, short term, we're going to go with a 70-30 mix. So 70% we're going to get from Bream's, which has guaranteed us the supplies, and 30% mix will be from holders. In the long term, we know that holders will be able to do it. And obviously, as we mentioned earlier, it will be a 6-month forecast, a rolling forecast. So if they cannot provide us with the inventory, with the 30% that we have initially that we're requesting from them, if they cannot do it, we'll definitely change our strategy. However, we do believe that they have the resources needed to do that, and that's why we're also diversifying the risk with going 70-30 in the first year and planned 80-20 in the next year. We're not going to go 100% right away with one supplier, but in the long term, we want to phase it out, and we'll be able to see if there are some valves that need to be produced for this new product that there might be shortages for, but we will be able to see as we go along if they're able to supply us and fulfill our supply demands.
Maybe I missed it, but I didn't see a net present value calculation for this alternative that you're recommending and any of the other alternatives you looked at. Did you do that calculation?
Well, there are several other variables that we need to put in it, and we did not want to give you with estimates that are just taken out of the air. There are some things in terms of distribution center, the long-term, the physical distribution center that we will put in. So we need to figure out where it's going to go, and that's what our model is going to provide us. And the second model will provide us with the cost of it, cost of the distribution center. Also, we have identified some software developers who produce these virtual inventory warehouse software, and we need to get in contact with them to get the estimates for that. However, we did do a forecast for revenues for 2006, and that is about 4.7% increase in revenues projected. But we did not want to, since there are so many 16 distribution centers that we have, and we did not want to just pick out one where we're going to place the distribution center, but rather provide you with a model where you can put in all of your data, put in all of your inventory data, and then find out which the best location is, and then which cost is the best for you.
Since your different business units have been managed individually, how do you kind of predict or expect to overcome that now that you're going with a centralized versus a decentralized model?
Excuse me. Initially, they are going to give us their demand figures based on which we will have the safety stock figured out, which is the virtual warehouse. So initially, there's no change in the system, just in the levels of safety stock, which they are going to see on their P&Ls. We've got cost savings. Then we want to phase it in when they see that there is a safety stock change. That's something that might interest, or that we are going to stress, and that might get them on board with the new warehouse that we're going to put in. Now, we're going to only keep the safety stock in that warehouse initially. That's the physical one. So it's going to be a step-by-step approach, and also we're wanting to tell them this is a test phase, which is going to be our virtual warehouse. And we believe that we are going to get them on board after they see what the cost savings are and how much faster we can provide customer service, because you don't have to wait all of a sudden 2 months for that one air conditioner to get here. Instead, you can just call Florida when you're in Arizona and you're out of that one unit, and you can get it within 2 to 3 days. So we know that our managers will understand, and since it's a step-by-step process, that they will come on board. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you. The next presentation is going to be by Team 2 from Purdue University, Cranard.
We're the same day. I don't think we're that far off. No, maybe not.
Okay, good afternoon. We are here to present our recommendations for WormCo. I'm going to introduce first my team, Justine. As you can see, she's beautifully dressed today. The reason why she has a presentation after this one about her trip to India. We have David and Brett. I'm Camilo, so I'm going to start, first of all, with the recommendations. First of all, we have two strategies, a short-term, long-term strategy. In the first short-term strategy, can you hear me? Perfect. In the short-term strategy, we plan to satisfy the demand in the first quarter of 2006. And in the long-term strategy, we want to move towards a leaner supply chain. So the overall strategy that we used for this purpose was, first, we mapped the entire system. We made some assumptions about the system. We calculated all the values that we needed for the model. After that, we looked into the supply chain structure. And finally, we did some development contingency plans. So let me go over the decision tree that we developed for this system. You can see it's quite complex. We have 2 decision points. We have July. Doesn't work. We have July. We have November as decision points. In between, we have a set of uncertainties. The first uncertainty that we are facing is the house market. That's an important one because we don't know if the market is going to go up or down. According to Bill, it's going to go down, but it's important to take into account other possibilities. The second one is scenarios. Bill considered that the main scenarios that we have to take into account into this specific problem are already defined. He already made his study and he got this kind of solution. So we thought that we could stick to those. Obviously, the model allows to include even more scenarios if we want to go for them. Installation regulation, that's the next uncertainty. It means that we don't know if all the counties in the different states in which we have businesses are going to allow us to install 10-SEER equipment. So we have to take into account certain distribution for that case. After November, the decision point in November, we are going to face two kinds of uncertainties. The first one is delivery. Why? Because we don't know if we are going to get the total amount of equipment that we ordered in November. So that has to be realized in some ways. And the second uncertainty is the way how the demand is realized in the first quarter. January, February, March are going to have different demands. So looking at this problem and the complexity, we said, okay, we have to go for some good assumptions. So we decided to simplify the problem in the following way. First of all, we decided to break down the decisions. So we are not going to make both of them at the same time. What we are going to do is we are going to basically make our decision in July, and based on that decision, we are going to make our decision in November. The second change, or the second simplification that we implemented in the model, is that we are, for the first decision point, we are going to satisfy the total demand, expected total demand in the first quarter of 2006. Next assumption is that we are going to reduce the number of possible scenarios in the house market. We are going to assume that the market is going to stay the same, and the second scenario is going to be the possibility given by Bill, which is that the market will go 30% down. Next simplification is that in terms of the installation of CR10 equipment, we decided to lump all the possible situations, and we said that 70% of the counties are going to allow us to install that kind of equipment. Finally, in terms of the uncertainties that we have after the second decision point, we are going to lump completely the demand for the first quarter, and in addition to that, we reduce the number of possible branches in all the decision tree to only 6, based on all the assumptions that we made. With that, I'm going to turn the podium to Justine to discuss the different variables that we use into the model.
Thanks, Camilo. The second step in our process is defining and characterizing the constraints. We determined 2 different constraints, the first one being warehouse capacity, and the second, net working capital. For warehouse capacity, we calculated that using the equation shown and obtained 52,000 units that were within the WARMCO system at any given point in time. Next, for net working capital, we calculated $300 million. It's important to know how much cash you have on time if you're considering pre-buys or ordering more equipment so that you have that in your warehouse. It's also important to know how much cash you have if you're looking at other strategies within your company, such as geographic expansion or possible purchase of IT systems to synchronize your distribution system. Our next step was estimating the product mix. We used the Logit model that was provided to us and obtained these percentages. Here we see that the different scenarios, scenario 1, 2, and 3, were also given to us in the case. We were able to combine these percentages with costs. In this step, we identified both the price and the cost for WARMCO for different products from different manufacturers. Here we see the Holder model is the lowest price at $807 for the 13-SEER model. This information was then fed into the decision tree model that Camilo originally discussed. In addition to a financial advantage, Holder also gives social and environmental advantages with their product. These include energy savings, pollution reduction, noise reduction, ozone impact elimination, compatibility with new coolants, and more compact equipment. Holder has really taken the initiative to develop a new product with a new design. This not only reduces their costs, but our costs, as well as introduces both social and environmental advantages. With this, they have a comparative advantage against their competitors, and they will be a sustainable partner with us in the long term. Next, Brett will talk about our supplier selection.
Thank you, Justina. So we've talked a little bit about the advantages that Holder has as our SEER 13 supplier, but we also need to consider Bream as one of our suppliers. The big advantage that they bring to the table is that we're pretty sure that they have a very reliable delivery. We have some concerns with Holder's ability to deliver, given the massive changes they're going to actually make to their SEER 13 product. Because Bream is going to make much smaller changes, we expect their delivery of that product to be a lot more reliable. So to take advantage of both of these situations, what we'd like to do is order from Holder in July, and then we can kind of look and monitor that situation. And if we expect there to be delays, we can make an order with Bream in November to make up for any shortfall. So how much are we going to order? Well, we forecast demand to be about 98,000 units in Q1 of 2006 for Warmco. Now that falls out, as you see on the slide, at about 2,500 for the SEER 10 units, nearly 35,000 for the SEER 13 units, and the remaining being in the SEER 14 and 15 units that really don't factor into the further analysis because